Welcome to the Sweet Science of Fighting podcast. Today we have Lee Brown, almost Dr. Lee Brown, almost. Yeah,
Almost,
welcome, Lee.
almost. Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming on. And interesting because your PhD was in Muay Thai, and we have very little to no research. I can probably think of maybe one or two papers that were actually in Muay Thai previously, and that was about 10 years ago. So this will be a really cool conversation and to really dive down. But do you want to just give a brief background about yourself, Lee, just for the listeners?
Yeah, so I've been in academia. Well, I've been working for the University of East London for the last 7 years. I've been researching mainly in combat sports. I'm actually just on the cusp of changing over. I'm working with the London Fire Brigade, working with tactical
Oh,
populations.
nice.
I've been working with the Parachute Regiment for the last 7 years, producing research and providing. I've been providing S&C for some of those guys in One Para Special Forces Support Group. I've been quite lucky enough to embed myself with those guys up in Colchester. My background in SSC, as I proudly wear my NSCA t-shirt, has been since 2009. I first picked up a JSCR manual journal in 2002, because that's how old I am, when I was doing my degree, and that literally changed my life. So I had a big thank you to Boyd who set that up. And the NSCA has been a huge driving force for me. When it talks to collaborations, we mentioned earlier, it's massive with the NSCA. It's an association of so many people that come together that share their ideas. And being as I'm a little bit on the loud and crazy side, I fit perfectly into the American kind of like etiquette as such. So yeah, my background, I've Thai boxed, I've done Thai boxing and kickboxing and boxing since I was 16. I played rugby since I was 5. I was a coach in my 20s. I did my bachelor's and my master's. I then moved into a boxing event for white collar boxing. If you look up Lee Brown boxing events, there's loads of stuff that comes up. We raised $2.5 million for charities, including my own charity.
Oh, wow.
And then I opened my own strength and conditioning gym called Spartan Strength and Conditioning, and I owned that for a number of years. Sold that and then got a job at the university, where I'm now currently researching, and I'm now on my 10th publication. And as mentioned, my PhD is by publication. It's on strength conditioning for Muay Thai, and I've got my Viva happening in December.
Awesome. Let's run through. You send me your thesis, and we can run through the different chapters in there, and kind of we can go a little deeper into each one, and we can start with the physiological profiles of Muay Thai.
Sure.
And you had a few Muay Thai athletes go through a few different tests. So for anyone listening, just your basic, I guess, strength power test: squats, pull-ups, bench press, jumps, and then you measured striking force or striking impact force on the PowerCube. So do you want to maybe just go into a little bit of details around that? Maybe
Sure.
just explain kind of what that PowerCube is, what you're trying to get out of it, and what you're trying to find from these profiles.
I'm pleased you asked me, actually, because it's quite contentious. When you go to publication, you've always got reviewers, and it's quite a tough one because they're like, what is the PowerCube? Obviously, when we measure impact forces, we should be looking at impulse, we should be looking at forces produced and all the rest of it. And powers, it's a tricky one. And my biomechanics colleague would rip into me if I said it was power and it's not, it's force. However, the metric on the PowerCube, it is in watts. It's the PowerCube is proprietary, so it's quite difficult to get the information off them, because for respect for PowerCube, it's a phenomenal bit of kit that's practical. We regardless of whether the output, the metrics are bananas or wardrobes or watts or newtons, regardless, we can use it for a pre and post because it's that good. We dropped a weight on it, a 5 kg med ball from a set height 50 times. It was the same every time, as long as you hit dead center. Now, there's a big shout, obviously, to Luke Del Vecchio, I always say his name wrong, from Australia. He's done some validation papers on it. He's done a lot of work. He's actually moved into the area of Parkinson's now. He's moved away from combat sports, similar to myself. The PowerCube, the big selling point, I don't work for PowerCube, but I work closely with the guys, and I've done some stuff with them, and I'm just a big advocate. It's really easy to use. It's padded, so you can hit it as hard as you want, and it's not going to break your hand. We've talked about thickening force platforms with like rubber and all the rest of it. And I speak to Anthony Turner, and it's true. And like you said, the more you padding you put on it, the less effective it becomes, because it more absorbs. But with the
Yeah.
PowerCube, it just gives the same results over and over and over and over again. As long as you hit it linear, you can't hit it from corners. Like if you was striking like a suitcase for a roundhouse, and usually uses shin, it goes in on a vector that it doesn't like. So if it's just like that, and it goes in on the angle, it hates it because it works, as far as I understand, on pressure, and it's got accelerometers in there, and it works by and like I said, the metrics. A lot of reviewers don't like it. They don't understand it. They hate it because it's in watts and it's not in watts. However, for a pre and post intervention, to measure over a certain amount of weeks, it's phenomenal. There are obviously limitations to it because it's made of foam. You have to have it calibrated, which is the reason why we drop the weight on it every single time. Because a PowerCube from 10 years ago to one now, I set one off. I set one off for it to be fixed, and it came back. I was getting like numbers of like 36,000 watts, and it come back and it was like 15,000 watts, and that was like instant ego bashing. We've also worked out with acceleration and vectors of G-force, anything over 30,000 on the hit was causing concussion and possibly fatality. However, when it goes off and it comes back again, those numbers go down. But that's why we calibrate it every time, so we can always make sure. So the biggest problem, I believe, within combat sports with research is having an overall norms. I've seen publications where they've had a mannequin, you know, those bobs, and they've had accelerometers attached to a bob done with a load of sellotape, and then they've hit them, then it's got published. Which, you know, if it works, it works. I've seen another one with a medicine ball, and I've seen all sorts. And you're not going to get someone to punch a force platform as hard as you can without causing injury. So I'm on an ethics board, so I approve studies, and I wouldn't approve a study that would be punching or kicking a platform. Not to say you can't do it, it's just a little bit difficult to do it. So the last reviewer that actually was very kind but a bit mean kicks back one of my studies that I'm desperate to get in, which is ballistic press-ups, which must be used. He said that actually, rather than focusing on the reliability of it, why not mention the practicality of it? Now, I would say I've seen PowerCube, like their videos, a lot of people hold it. If you're holding a PowerCube, you sit down here. The UFC guys do. I mean, Duncan French sort of who's on the fence about it, but if you hold it and you get hit, if you're 100 kilos and you're 60 kilos, when you get hit, you get moved. So the force impact will be different. So I would say if you're going to use it for research, for testing, put it against a solid surface. A PowerCube have just come out with this prototype. They love throwing things at me because I love testing. I test everything. Absolutely everything I look at, there's a brand new question with everything. I'm very curious, and they've got this attachment. You can now put it to a squat rack, and then it's done. And you can change the height. You can move it around. You know, before they had it on like Velcro, it just wasn't practical. But now they've just nailed it. They just need to, I believe, if they were to really push this product forwards, is to one, show a way of calibrating it, and two, to be able to get metrics to be accepted by the sports science world. However, that being said, my PhD is on strength conditioning for coaches. You're not going to get many coaches. You're not going to get many athletes. I'm not saying this in a negative way, reading a JSCR. I struggle with a JSCR sometimes because it just gets a bit... So like, for instance, I put it in the Australian Strength Conditioning Journal. That's very, very easy to read. And their actual outlay, they say, do not put anything in there that's too sciencey. It's there for coaches. And that's what the PowerCube is for. If you've got fighters, I work with Stonebridge Boxing Club as a pro-am gym, and they have fighters coming. They use, we always use them to go into there, and it's a really good measure to show performance. So if you've got, like for instance, Seth, he mentioned a lot of stuff about the landmine press for a great way to measure your strikes. But like Seth and I, we have these conversations, and the trouble is that's an open chain kinetic exercise. Whereas a punch, when you hit, it's open chain, but as soon as it connects, it becomes closed chain. But a landmine doesn't do that. And even if you're throwing it, you know, it's the three Newton's laws, isn't it? The first law is not doing anything. The second law, you're throwing something. And the third law, which I believe, which Seth and I both agreed on, is the most important. It's the connection. So I did a study on the physiological profiles of army boxers and their novices. And there was like no correlation between strength and their striking, because there's no plyometric involved. There's no reactive strength. There's no tension. There's no rigidity. But that will improve over doing pads and hitting heavy things. So when it comes to testing, I believe, and again, this is opinion, my belief from my research. This is not to say it's true, because I'm not ignorant enough to say, you know, there's still so much we don't know, right? I mean, shit, we still call each other different races when there's only one race. I mean, what does that even work? So we're still so far behind. But I believe that PowerCube, and again, not being I work for them, just I'm a big advocate, is a great device that's practical and can be used as long as it's calibrated to test and retest. But it should be used for norms. So I'm speaking to a guy in Finland, and he's been using it like way more than me, but his numbers will be different to mine because it's a different cube, because there's sponge on it, you know, like the impact may change. Whereas it's the same with Hawkins, the same with full sticks, but they can be calibrated, which is this one's not as easy. But if you use something to drop it on, it's done. So yeah, sorry, I went a bit off on one then, but I'm just sort of trying to explain myself that I try and explain to every reviewer. Please don't, discount it just because it's not something you don't understand. You should say it doesn't work. So yeah,
perfect. And within that study as well, so they were hitting the PowerCube, and you were just looking at correlations between these exercises, and was it, I guess, the impact force on the PowerCube? Do you want to maybe just dive into a little bit of that? It seems like it just reinforces some of the stuff that we know from previous research.
Yeah, so now I've got the PowerCube out of the way, and I've just explained the reason why I've used it, because again, it's a good bit of kit, and we use correlations. I couldn't derive norms. I can't turn around and say, this is normative data for a pro fighter. We've had, we're quite lucky. I know I'm not supposed to mention names of studies, but we had someone from Team Underground who's currently a pro from one championship, but again. Screen participants, GDPR, I can't mention names, but we had some really high profile fighters and they were banging that cube. But then we did the strength tests, and there's so much out there to say, so many coaches, and my background being from Muay Thai, Muay Thai's, I'm probably getting told off for this, but boxing coaches tend to use information that their coaches coach used from last century, who used from theirs. and it is slowly changing, but I believe Muay Thai and MMA, they're a little bit more prolific with their research wise, and the idea of this chapter of my thesis is to produce something to say, look, loads of squat jumps. It's a correlation, not a causation. So we can't directly say that's the reason why. There's just like if it rains outside, there's going to be people buying umbrellas, but that doesn't mean it's a causation. If you go outside and you get wet, that's the causation. So we know that if you're good at pull-ups, which is understandable as well, right? Because you've got your lats, you're using that as part of your wind up, as part of the second phase of the punch. So the correlations I've got on there were quite strong. The one that was kind of surprising for me really was the bench press. Was a large correlation, but wasn't massive. It was like 0.5. But my recent study I've done with ballistic press ups showed that there was no correlation between punches and press ups. But we've done it on upper limb RSI. So we've done like the drop press up, and there was like a 0.96 correlation with the jab and stuff like that. I didn't want to use it.
Explain what that means. Explain what 0.96 means for the listeners, because people would see numbers.
So if it's 1, it means it's perfect. It means it's 1. That correlation. There's nothing to be argued about that. And the lower down it goes, the less it is a relationship, not a causation, but a relationship. So 0.96 is like near perfect. And that actually builds on the work of Seth Lenetsky. And I know he'd done his stuff before and he kind of called me out. But Seth's work on effective mass with fighting is what's massively driven all my work that was post this PhD. So it's the idea of being, there's no point in being heavy if you can't strike. And there's no point if you can't strike if you can't land. So we've done the drop press ups from 10 centimeters from wide, and we're going on the drop mat, and then we just see how high you can bounce up. And the correlation was near perfect from that. So it could be used, I would say, as a training tool. So how ready is your fighter? You've been injured, you've been out of camp, whatever else. And we know that a plyometric or striking with a plyometric can cause tendinopathies if the tendon and the muscle aren't prepared. So this RSI, it just gives us, and that's from Eamon Flanagan. I do apologise if he's listening and he may have heard that wrong. He's the godfather of RSI. And his work is, have you had him on this?
I have not had him on here.
Oh my God.
Bring him on, actually.
Yeah, he's phenomenal. The guy, he's such a he's so humble as well, but his work on RSI is just driven. I'm trying to sort of jump on the back of it. I'm standing on the shoulders of giants with Seth and And the RSI is a great way to say that your training's, you know, at peak and we're up and we're ready. But I don't believe it should be used by proxy as a striking predictor, because when it comes to striking, you've got so many variables. You might have, you know, problems with your feet, or you might have a different core strength. We know you start from the feet, and you have to have stiffness in the core to then translate that to upper body. We know that, but you can't. I believe, and I reviewed a paper that they were trying to say that a counter movement jump, because it correlates like 9.6, which it does, 0.96 to sprinting. They wanted to use it as by proxy instead of a sprint. But a sprint's a sprint and a jump's a jump. You know, yeah. You remember, didn't you? You see it, and I sort of said, "Well, look, it's a great relationship, but explain it as a relationship. Don't say, you know, if you're going to test for sprint, test for sprint. If you're going to test for a punch, test for a punch. Don't do it by proxy, but just use it there as an assessment." I'm massive on testing and assessments. There are coaches out there that would say different, and we're all allowed to have our own opinions, which we should, because that brings different kind of skin to the game. But for me, I would always do assessments. I need to know where my athletes are. I need to know if there's asymmetries. And that's why I did this profile. So this basically was a build on from Anthony Turner's paper that originally done it in the Strength and Conditioning Journal. And his was kind of based on a lot of other types of sports like wrestling and stuff like that. So there was nothing specific. And I've actually been in touch with Anthony, and we're going to do on the back of this an updated version, so a part 2. So his paper actually drove my PhD to where it is now. So if it weren't for him, I wouldn't be in. I basically would be here now. So that's the kind of outline to that. So that paper would show, if you was a coach, we should be doing squats, we should be doing pull-ups. What should be exercises you could complement? And again, I might get told off for this, and people will argue it, but I see strength and conditioning as an additive, as a supplement to boxing. It should be a supplement. So it should be done, because without strength, you're not going to be any good. But, you know, if you're
going to be in agreement with you listening to this podcast, I don't think anyone's going to argue with you with that.
I've seen someone say different, but it may spill my profession a bit. But I think, you know, the additive that we give is the fact that, one, we know for a fact you cannot be rehabilitated without strength. That's a fact. Without strength, you can't produce force. You can't produce reactive strength. You can't produce a strike without strength. And if you get that strength training right, then you're not going to, because obviously the stronger you get, the more energy you use. But then if you can periodise that in the strength training with endurance, you're going to have less injuries. We know that football, the last sort of 10 minutes is the most likely time you're going to get an injury, because that's when you're fatigued. That's the most time you're going to have it. Not that. That's the one and only time I'm ever going to talk about football, by the way.
It actually leads us well into your next chapter around Olympic weightlifting derivatives for kicking performance. And I've done a few different videos on the channel on Olympic weightlifting derivatives. I didn't use much Olympic weightlifting within a lot of my rugby stuff, just with big teams. You can just do loaded jumps and stuff. I'd use a lot of them myself, and especially for grappling and MMA, I really like them. And obviously you've used them here for Muay Thai, which is quite interesting. So we're going to run into it. So for just quick background for anyone listening. So Olympic weightlifting derivatives, Lee will run into kind of what they did there, but they saw small improvements in counter movement jump, so essentially vertical jump, and roundhouse kick power, which is the interesting ones. Do you want me to go into a little bit of kind of what you did there and how you're interpreting that data?
Yeah, so basically that's a big shout out to Paul Comfort. He's another guy. If you haven't had him on the show, you've got to have him on. The guy, he's the person I go on to have a chat with.
He's done like 1,000 papers.
Oh my God, he tells me off every time. He's like anyone in biomechanics talks to me like my dad, apart from Mitchell Finley, because I think he's a lot younger than me. But yeah, so basically, I did a bases workshop on Olympic lifting derivatives in Southern University with Paul and co, and it was brilliant because, like you say, with a big team, how hard is it for a rugby player to be able to produce a snatch? You know, that difficulty of going from one position, like your first pull into your scoop, that on its own goes into the shoulder shrug. You know, how hard is it to catch for a rugby player? Imagine like a prop coming off the pitch and you're asking him to do that. It'd just be like... So I needed a way to see whether or not this would work. And it was only over a short amount of weeks, but it should be... I was expecting more. I was expecting to have bigger improvements, but that could be for many other reasons. But then they were quite high level fighters. So to see smaller increments is kind of like a bigger increment because you've got such small amounts to go by. And we did the counter movement jump just to see whether or not it worked for the actual lifting itself. So otherwise you could turn around and say, you know, they might have got better with the kicking because they just improved over time with the kicking. So I wanted to see there was a physiological difference. And I'm massive. I know Seth mentioned it before, but the counter movement jumps, that is, I believe that's kind of like as an SSC coach, that is our kind of like, you know, that's like our minerals of everything we're going to make. That's something that we should be using, I believe. The counter movement jump is massive. I'm not big on those vertex, by the way. I can't stand them. Have you moved one of those around? We've got one in the lab.
I've been lucky enough that I haven't had to use one.
No, they're so cumbersome, and you'll always guarantee you'll hurt your shins. So if you do some Thai boxing, it's perfect because then you can use it for your conditioning. But they're really off because you're using your arms to jump, and obviously you're not doing it. We want to identify the triple extension. You know what's coming from that. So I would say use the Olympic lifting derivatives, just because it's an exercise that's easily done. If you're already doing squats, why not do squat jumps? Why not make it into a power phase? Why not make it into that? But I wouldn't, again, personally, I wouldn't say this was like the be all and the end all. It was just, I wanted to know from our physiological study and our outcome from squats, how can we change that squat into something different that's more appropriate? So therefore we've got it. I wanted to see what the squat could be made from, because it's a massive kinetic exercise, a kinetic chain exercise, and it uses everything, right? You've got to have stiffness for the core. But these guys had never done anything like this before. So you kind of expect them to have bigger improvements, but it might be they were holding something back. I think there needs to be more investigation into that. And you know, if you've already got a busy schedule, it could be something you could just do as a warm up. It could be something you could do like as an extra additive session. So you know, you shouldn't be tired afterwards. Doing Olympic lifting, you should be knackered. You're going to be hot and sweaty and neurological, right? But I believe the derivatives you should be absolutely wasted because it's a power, isn't it? So that's the kind of results you got from them.
What derivatives did you end up using?
We used the really easy ones, like the jump shrug. It's just so easy. Okay. The jump shrug, the jump shrug and the high pulls. I mean, the high pulls, I think, can get a little bit lost because as soon as you go into that scoop, and that's when people, just before, they go with the elbows bend, and it goes into the lower back of the neck, and it goes away from it. So I try to keep it really simple. I think there should be more study, and like you said, there's nothing. I mean, there's a handful of studies in Muay Thai. And Muay Thai is like becoming one of the fastest ever growing sports, right? I mean, one championship around the world. Mm-hmm. Why are we not doing this? And you'll find the persons I've spoken to in combat sports, most of probably 90% has been a practitioner and a fighter. So I've obviously had a number of fights, and I've wanted to know, and we're always being told stuff. So where does it come from? So you have that passion. I think it should be. I think if there's anyone listening to this, they're doing research on it, I think it should be great as a dissertation study at university that could be turned into a publication. But Olympic lifting derivatives, not the full lifts, I think are
How
useful.
heavy did you load that jump shrug and the high pulls?
I mean, that was the other thing as well. I wasn't there for every session, so sometimes. But then I'm a bit also on believing in self-selected intensities. Mm-hmm. So it might be one day to come in, but then it depends on how good they are as an athlete. So it was going at like 60s and 70%, then was building it up. So it wasn't going for a massive smash. And these guys had trained before, but they hadn't overly trained. So I had to be careful about, and this is always a difficult part as well about doing longitudinal studies, is the fact that you're now invading their schedule. Yeah. I prefer schedule, but I get told off for that here in English. Schedule, it's not a shed. And then you're invading and you're encroaching onto the coach's fight times. So if you mess someone up, you're going to mess up their fight. So we had to be a little bit careful. So that actually may be one of the limitations. We could have gone heavier. We could have gone way heavier. But it was kind of doing it as like an additive.
How much do you think it could be, say, just because it's a novel training stimulus that ended up improving?
There is that as well. I expected it to, if it was a novel training stimulus, I'd have said it a bit more, if I'm being brutally honest, because it's novel, it's different, isn't it? It's something they haven't done before. But then, are they doing other exercises, like their explosive stuff? Is that too similar? And like you said, with the weight and intensity, I was kind of overly cautious. And I didn't go too heavy. So maybe, and we know, don't we, that the general adaptation syndrome, GAS, if you don't give your body enough weight, it's not going to adapt. So that may be, thinking about it now, this is quite good actually, because I'll use this in my Viva, that actually may be a limitation. But that could also be moving forwards, this will be doing something else. Maybe use people that are out of competition, post-competition. I didn't want to ruin anyone's chances if that makes sense, which is ethically binding as well, right? Ethically binding. You know, these guys are going into a fight. At the end of the day, it's combat sports. It's not a game of rugby or football, is it? You're going in there to knock each other out or be knocked out. So I didn't want to lessen their chances. And again, this sort of goes back to the whole ethos and ethics to my PhD. Safety over performance. So yeah, I do believe I could have ramped it up. They definitely, and like you say, a novel training system. But then it could be an argument for using it as well, right? If you're doing the same thing over and over again, nothing's going to happen. It's Einstein states, doesn't it? It's the definition of madness. Doing the same thing over and over again, expect different results. So maybe use it as a novel. Maybe use that. But it's also familiarization. But there's a low familiarization in derivatives as opposed to the full lifts.
Nice. And I guess another potential limitation, maybe if someone was kind of looking at that and you're testing roundhouse kick power, but it's like a one-off, you're loading up to hit this PowerCube versus in a fight, you're never going to get that chance. Do you think there is that translation or transfer?
Absolutely. I think that's
to power in the fight.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. I was thinking about this the other day. In every testing scenario, they're always going to be doing a lot more in a test than they will do on the field. You're absolutely right. I remember this one guy, and he was getting these massive numbers, and everyone was like, but it was like, you know, the fairground, those stupid things that come down.
Winding up.
Yeah, and we're standing there. Yeah, we're trying to like do it all properly, and then you get this drunken yob from Southend. I love Southend, but from Southend, come running up from 100 meters, and they just launch it. And you're absolutely right. This guy was smashing it, and numbers are coming up. You're not going to do it in the fight, because you're most likely to get knocked out whilst you're throwing a knockout punch. It's going to happen, right? Chuck Liddell is the typical example. So, yeah, you're absolutely right. That could be another limitation. But we tried to film them. We tried to, as much as we can, allow them to do their own technique because we don't want to change anything. But then on the other respect, we have to expect the unexpected. And at the end of the day, you know, this kind of like what my biomechanist Gary Dawes forever saying, you know, at the end of the day, we're only human and we're still only 2024. We're still lacking in technology. We have to put our hands up at some point and say there's only so much we can cover. I mean, we're now I believe we're a beckoning where we now know that we're the cleverest, dumbest animals on the planet. There's so much we don't know, but before we didn't know that we didn't know, but now we know, right? So you're absolutely right. I think that's a big limitation. You've got to be really careful about how people hit that, because you've got like a novice would hit like this, most novices, whereas someone trained, especially in a big hitters like Mighty Mo, he'd swing, cocking phase, and he'd throw over the top. and the difference is phenomenal. But that's the beauty of the PowerCube as well. What I found, and again, not sort of advertising for them, is you can change someone's punch within one session. They've got this one guy, I won't mention his name because he's massive, and he hit it and he got like 7,000. And I looked at him, I was like half his size, and I hit it, it was 36,000. And I looked at him, I was like, I'd like to fight you because it made me look brilliant. But it's just that technique of that winding up, that cocking phase. But even that cocking phase, you may leave yourself open. So could you know that would be, I think with a study, with research, I try to focus on the smallest amount of variables, and you're definitely going to lose other variables. But that's the reason why we write limitations at the end that someone else could perhaps pick up on. Yeah. I mean, there's loads of limitations in these studies, but that's because it's the first of its kind. And every study should have its methodology, so the next person can come along. And again, if anyone's listening to this and would like to collaborate, I mean, at the moment I'm collaborating with 12 different universities, 3 different sports institutions, and in 17 different countries. So, and I've got 15 of my students published on my papers. So I'm happy, more than happy, to have these chats and bring people in. So
awesome. And your last 2 chapters are on post-activation potentiation or post-activation performance enhancement. So this will be interesting. I don't know if you saw a recent paper that came out a couple of months ago, kind of, I guess, throwing light on the quote-unquote myth of post-activation performance enhancement. Maybe let's go into, since I brought up, we'll cover it there.
No, I'll tell you what, James, we're going to talk about this because I saw someone tagged me on a post you put on Instagram with regards to a rather mean critique. No, it's good. It's good. No, it's good.
It's good. You talking about the one I did of your paper that I did for Science for Sport. Yeah, that was a different one.
No, funny enough, this one, and I had to agree with you. It kind of, I wanted to say what I wanted to say, and I think I explained to you this before, didn't I? The idea of post-activation potentiation, and like you say, is it a myth? Is it not? They call it a phenomenon. It's a warm-up. That's all it is, a warm-up, right? But the idea is to activate, and it's just calling it something different. So before, and I don't want to sort of rubbish off for PhD, but before I started out, I was all into PAC. And it was at a time, it was back in the day when everyone was in a pack. It was like, wow, this is amazing. This is, and afterwards I kind of, and I did, like you said, and yours, so what? It's a warm up, but so what? But I still believe it needs to be studied, because it's then, okay, so to put it in perspective, a company I used to run, that gym, was called Spartan Strength and Conditioning, and it's a bit cliche being Spartans, right? So, but the Spartans on record by the Persians, and again, I don't always believe history because it's made by the victors, but it's on record that the Spartans were the first ever populations to use strength and conditioning, because the Persians would observe in their recon, and they would observe in the recon, and they would laugh at the fact that the Spartans were fighting each other before battle. As you know, as a rugby player, how hard is that going on at half time without a warm up? You just get beat up. So therefore, could I use this as this? And you made a good point. You're right. Fighters, and I had to say, the review was quite mean. and when you go to publish a paper, you kind of have to toe the line. And I get it, because it's someone that's reading it that hasn't had any involvement. And that's the trouble with when you write. I'm still an early career researcher, and even late career research, still the same. You get so involved in a paper, you so believe in it, but then you're only telling your story. You need to have it so everyone can understand it. So therefore, the reviewer was like, so I wanted to say, look, why can't we use it as complex training? It'd be perfect. And you said that as well. You've already got an overly busy schedule. So why would you then go and make something different? And I didn't want to do that. I wanted to put it in as part of, look, you've done your squats. Okay, we'll give it 5-10 minutes, or whatever it is, 5 minutes. Then go and hit the PowerCube. You're there anyway. Or not the PowerCube, but a pad. And hit that 10 times. Bam, 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 bam. Because then you're converting. Because the thing is with strength training on its maximum strength training will make the muscle strong, but it won't train it to be explosive. And I know there's a whole lot, we can't use the word explosive, but I'm using that because you've seen that, haven't you?
For the listeners.
It's a metaphor. Come on, no one's going to explode. But so it makes it like a fast, active to action for those biomechanists listening. So if you just train your muscles in a slow but strong movement, that's not how your muscle's going to react when it comes to fighting. So if you can implement, this is what I wanted to say, but they didn't allow me because I didn't test it. And I get it. If you was to do that as part of your maximum strength phase and just do some light kicking at the end, that won't interrupt your schedule. That will actually increase the bodies, or the motor units, all the synapses going fine, the brake coding, everything going really fast. Then that synapses, and they meet it, will be quicker. So that's why that was my conclusion I come to. There was that study with the elastic banding. Did you see that elastic tubing with PAP? That was kind of one that I saw.
Was that you want Mitchell Finlay's one or a different one?
So the Mitchell Finlay, is that the one you was talking about, the Mitchell Finlay one? Because that was really good.
No, I was talking about, there was a new one that did 3 studies in one, and they looked at 3 different interventions on counter movement jump. But what they did is they did an intense general warm up. So they tested counter movement jump, general warm up, counter movement jump, specific warm up, counter movement jump, intervention, counter movement jump at all the different time points, and then they saw no difference, no real increases in counter movement jump.
It's like infinite,
anything through that since the general warm up. And I was it's interesting because it's kind of like, if we're warming up enough, is doing heavy squats or something really giving us a PAPE effect? I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
No, absolutely. And the thing is, I'd never be able to so probably pretty obviously from my side, I would say I don't know their methods enough. I think everyone's slightly different, but we're all the same. I think that I don't think any study at the moment in 2024 is able to rubbish anything, because we just don't know. Every method is going to be slightly different, and it could be like a slightly different day. The variables are so massive. Mine was a bit more of a fact finder. Mine was a bit more, would it work? Does it work? And again, going back to all my studies, every study I'll ever do, the first thing I do is it safe? Is it safe to do? Will that cause an injury? No, it hasn't. Okay, brilliant. Are there any performance factors? Yes, there are. There were from this. And again, I was basically looking at timings. So that was my sort of variable. What are the timings? So I wasn't necessarily looking at it for application in sport. I was looking more for timings. And then I wanted to lead into my other study. And again, these sort of proliferate into a thread, hence the reason my PhD by Viva. You have to make it as one sort of trail. So, the PAP phenomenon, it keeps talking. I don't think there should be too much perhaps focus on it, maybe, because warm up's a warm up, right? It's better than nothing. But then what if you could warm up, and everyone's going to be different. Your warm up might be completely different to mine. I've been known being a rugby player, especially late career, and I've done it before. I'm a member of the David Lloyd, so I'll have 2 pints of lager before I go and train. But that won't work for anyone else. I still have, and I can eat whilst sparring, but my brother can't eat 4 hours before. Otherwise, he'll be sick. But I can literally, I used to have some sandwiches, and particularly my last couple of fights, I was a little bit of an idiot, but I'd neck in bottles of Beck's. Well, I could do that. That's my system, whereas other people can't. So there is that kind of like the whole methodology. I think every paper should be taken as it is and helped to build a bigger picture. But I think no one paper should be identifying that one thing. Even position statements, even they are just saying what we've got at the moment. This is what we know now. I mean, people still say the kids can't strength train. What's that about? They can, just don't do it, within certain, you're not doing a lot of massive powerlifting and reps and sets. So the kind of like the kick to my whole post-activation, potentiation of Muay Thai was a kind of discovery about timings. We know that because I don't know if you've done this before, but back sort of 10, 15 years ago, if I was doing research, I thought PAC was where you do like some deadlifts and then you go straight into some sprints. I didn't realise you're supposed to have that rest period. And there's one PAC article saying that you can rest up to 30 minutes and it still works. Does it work? Would it work for fighting? I don't know how long it would work. But I also know, looking at Tyson, and I try and do it myself, I'm sure others do, if you could activate your motor units and you could have the best ever strike, and it's only once, but you've gone in there and you've knocked them clean out, isn't that the best fight ever? Isn't that what everyone wants? That'd be awesome, wouldn't it? You don't make it past the first round. So it's open for discussion, I believe. That's what I think. And I would never say mine is, the be all and end all, because that's not the NSCA way. Just because it's not my way, that doesn't mean it's the only way.
For sure. Yeah, and I will say this, the Science for Sport post they put out, they took my quote way out of context and they added their quote to their post. So it sounded worse than it was.
No. But it's like anything, isn't it? It's with feedback. First of all, I mean, I've been told not to keep going on about it. Like ADHD, so when it comes to feedback, it's like, but every time I read a reviewer, I've always been mean to one of them. Seth will back me up for that. But every time you get feedback, I'm a coach. I have to reflect. I'm a scientist. I have to take that on board. I look at stuff like that as devil's advocates. Can I argue it? Is there a reason? And what you made was a good point, which then went into my last journal, which was talking about the eccentric stuff, and that was about putting it into complex.
Yeah, that's really interesting what you did there. The flywheel eccentric overload. So you had the rack mount.
Never been done. Never been done.
Yeah,
never been done.
I think was it with an Exafly? I think it was with an Exafly.
Yeah, so Exafly had they'd sort of approached about doing some research, and again, so I wasn't given any funding for it or anything like that. But the Exafly stuff, and you mentioned Mitchell Finlay, and I've got to big him up because he's one of my examiners for December, so he's listening.
Tell him to get back to me and book a time to get on the pod, man. It's been 2 months.
He's busy. Yeah, no, I get it. No, he's, to be fair, he's a typical biomechanist. They are always busy. If you ever get any time from them, honestly, it's like gold dust. And he's such a nice guy. And again, I'm not just saying that because he might be looking at this, listening, and thinking he's talking. But his work, I didn't realise until because he reviewed one of my papers and he made some really good points. And then he left his name on it. I contacted him. I had a chat with him. He's such a nice guy. Honestly, it'll be great for your podcast. He's such a nice guy. And his stuff that he's done, and he started publishing after his PhD. So he's done his the other way around to mine. And his stuff that he's done on the end point for the PAP stuff and the elastic, that was so good because I was arguing with a reviewer about the punch being, because they called a punch an open chain. I was like, no, it's not. Because when you hit, that's when it becomes closed chain. It's when you're pushing off. And Mitchell's paper was perfect because he kept talking about the isometric at the end point. So the Exafly was exactly the same. Have you used an Exafly before?
Oh, yeah, many times. Luckily enough, the owner was the next block over from my house back in New Zealand.
No way.
So I went over to that. And then had one in the garage just recently. And
yeah, brilliant. They're so versatile, aren't they? And there's, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but the guy who does all their research, John Cronin. Oh, my God.
John Cronin. He's been on the pod.
He's a legend. Is he?
My faculty director, dude.
Yeah, phenomenal. I can't talk to him too much because being a Kiwi, because I'm England and we've got terrible rugby team. But we did do really well against you guys that one game. But then we lost against South Africa, so we let them have that. But the Exafly, what I found really interesting about that, and this is what I'm a big believer in, so I'd never really used it before, and this is something I really want someone to follow on some more research with, is the fact that when you're throwing it out, and yes, the more, which is beautiful, because the more velocity you give, the more it gives back, right? So
Yep.
that would therefore show a bigger, because PAP's all about, how much can you activate that muscle? How much can you, it's a warm up. So how much can you activate that muscle to go into a specific motion? It goes specificity versus generalization, right? But what I found the best part, and this is what I kind of put in there about why I'd like to be identified, that could have been a major variable to increasing the power punch, is that when you get to the end point, it jolts. It gets to the
Yep.
end point, it's boom, and it's really. And some of the guys had used it before, and again, these guys were pretty well trained. They were big hitters, and then as they're throwing it out, you jump it back in. So isn't that surely being so specific?
Okay, yeah.
So, and then that's what then married up. I'm getting all passionate there. That's what married up with Mitchell's work on the end point. Is it the fact it's the end point? It's that stiffness, and that's the Newton's third law. And I want anyone sort of listening to this. I need to and this goes back to Seth stuff about the effective mass. It's all fair enough looking at the first and the second laws of Newton's laws, especially everyone's training supposes everyone's Newton's second law. Newton's second law, is that mass times. Oh no, I've forgotten it. Mass times acceleration equals force. Oh God, Gary will tell me off for that. But it's the Newton's third law. It's for every reaction there's an equal and opposite reaction. So when you're hitting something, you're creating kinetic energy. You're converting energy into kinetic energy. So if you're not fully prepared, if you haven't got that rigidity, that muscle stiffness, tendon stiffness, and the entirety of the body, that kinetic energy is going to go back into you. So it's going to tire you out. It's going to cause fatigue. And it's then going to have a lesser performing punch, but it could also cause bigger injuries. So that's where the upper limb RSI stuff I'm doing and this exercise. Anyone that's doing stuff on exercise, please research that, because the stuff on exercise, I think the exercise should be in every boxing gym. Or a flywheel. I think that should be in every boxing gym, and it should be there for newbies, because the kind of like the whole plyometric, the contentious subject of plyometric, you shouldn't be using those for newbies, because that can increase your muscle strength, but it doesn't keep your tendon up. So your tendon will slow and it becomes a tendinopathy. So there should be sort of perhaps there should be things to look upon, studies for the safety and efficacy of that. But at exercise, it was brilliant. And I just saw people and then when we compared against the cable fly, and the cable fly was like, oh, and that was like, it changed your stance. It made it look different, and it was just all like, and then it was slowing down.
The cable.
Exactly. So it was like for me, it was a big smack in the face saying that every gym should have an exerfly. I mean, I say exerfly because it was just a really good bit of kit. There are other flyballs out in the market. I don't know which ones they are, but you can put it anywhere as well, anywhere, and you can do anything. And the best thing about exerfly is the eccentric training for rehab and for, we don't know how to call it prehab anymore, right? For injury risk reduction. So, like obviously being a rugby player, when it gets cold, the sniper takes you out for the hamstrings, right? But if you've been using that, don't you? Running along, you're about to smash your opposition, and then the sniper hits you, and you have to walk off the pitch. But if you had that exerfly in your gym, it would just be, I would say, if I was going to pick anything out, any bit of kit, it would be the exerfly, it would be the flywheel. I would definitely have that. And I've actually got one. So I would definitely use it.
Yeah, for anyone interested, if you go back and listen to John Cronin on the podcast,
big.
We've talked about flywheel stuff a lot. Even Cody Roberts as well, who did a whole episode on flywheels. I've done a bunch of stuff on the channel as well, just videos as well. Yeah. It's really good stuff. But I want to wrap this up, Lee, and I want to have you go through, I guess, just from your PhD thesis, how has it changed or influenced your view of strength conditioning for Muay Thai? Is anything new come out of it for you? Or is this kind of just validating what you thought originally?
Oh, good question. Okay, so this would be actually in my Viva, so I'm pleased you asked this because I'm practicing for it. So with all research, we have to fill a gap in research. I believe it has. I believe, especially with the physiological profile, I believe that's given enough weight to say, let's go and do strength training. Which ones? I think that has definitely cleared that up that was validating. So I think that's more of a validation. I believe the Olympic lifting was also validation, but I'd like to see that explored more. I think there's still a big gap in research for that. And with the PAP stuff, I've sort of moved on, but with the flywheel, that has really, really surprised me. I was completely shocked by it. We've just done a big, massive study on Parkinson's disease and hypoxia. And we've found a treatment. We've found a treatment. It's an Alexander Fleming moment. We're like, wow. And that's kind of and a bit of a smaller scale with a flywheel. I would say that's the biggest thing out of that PhD I found, the usefulness with that stuff. And like I said, Mitchell Finlay will probably, not probably, but he will. Because I'm looking to work with Anthony Turner and Mitchell Finlay, but I can't at the moment because they're both my examiners, which is a shame really because I really like them. Because my exam is on Muay Thai, so I was going to go in there and punch and kick them all. And when they come, no, I was only joking. But no, it's I would say strongly flywheel has definitely opened my eyes up to what the objectiveness of that can do. Yeah. And I think, and I believe, maybe a bit biased, but I believe that my PhD that I've got in front of me that I'm Ross using as reference, I believe that is, and like you said from the start, there's hardly any research. Loads on boxing, loads on judo, loads on all these other sports, but nothing on Thai boxing. And there's loads of people that are sort of saying they're the experts. But how can you be an expert if you don't really know? And it's not to say I want people to think from a research point of view. Just because it hasn't been researched doesn't mean it doesn't work. But to validate something, you have to research it. So I'd say use research-backed information, but don't say, "Oh, it's not been researched, so it doesn't work." That's the NSCA. I'm there as a practitioner and a researcher. I bridge the gap. So if anyone's listening, then more than happy to send out my email address, and as long as there's not millions of them, I don't mind much. I'm sure there won't be because they've probably had enough of my chat already. But yeah, I would say that would be the gap in research is kind of like. It's validating and you're right. Yeah, validating it and showing me new stuff.
Awesome. Where can people find the following and get in contact with you? Do you want me to we're linking up your Instagram, LinkedIn? Where do you want to send people?
Yeah, Instagram's good. I've been quite good on Instagram actually. I've cleaned up my act a little bit, and I've been told to behave myself. So being an academic and an advocate of the NSCA, so they can find me on Instagram, which is my Lee Brown. I think if you put it up there, it'll be easier.
I'll link it in the description for you. It'll be there. It's,
and more than happy, if you want to put on my personal email as well, they can do that. The lee.brown7000@gmail.com, and I'm more than happy to have meetings. I'm actually building up. I've got quite a big steering group and the NSCA stuff as well. We're on LinkedIn. So if anyone's listening, want to get more involved, and because Seth's one of these was put on our LinkedIn groups, the Combat Sports SIG. So that's kind of like leading forward some research in it. And there's loads, that group they've got some really big researchers, some people, and this is amazing. That's what I love about the NSCA is I get to speak to people. I've been reading their books for the last 10. I met Haff and Triplett, who wrote The Essentials. I met them at the last conference. I was such a nerd. I was like, please get a picture. And I was meeting all these amazing people, and it was little old me. So yeah, anyone's listening, if you follow the NSCA and get involved in the NSCA, it gives back as much as you put in. So it's brilliant.
No, perfect. I'll link those in the description. And yeah, if anyone is on LinkedIn, Combat Sports SIG, I think it is.
The NSCA. That's it. Yeah.
It is.
And if people want to send me an email, and I'll always answer back. I can't. That's just who I am. So I'm more than happy to chat.
Perfect. I'll link that all up.
I don't think I swore today, did I? Did I swear? I think I was quite limited. I tend to swear quite a lot.
No, I don't think you did.
That was my biggest thing, wasn't it? When I first spoke to you, I was like, I don't do podcasts. I just don't do them.
Yep.
Because I swear quite a lot. I'm from Essex, and it's like our second language. So, yeah. My apologies for anyone if I did. Brilliant.
Well, I appreciate you coming on, Lee.
No, I appreciate you doing this, because this is my little warm-up for my PhD by pubs. And fingers crossed in December, I'll be Dr. Brown. So I'll have to buy a DeLorean and get called Doc Brown and go back to the future. So, yeah, no, I'm happy with that. And we've got those... I'll send you some more information, but I've got 4 more studies that have been under review about ballistic press-ups versus dynamics. We had a 50% increase on ballistic press-ups just by doing those power press-ups. Unbelievable. I need to get that word out there. We're doing upper body RSI, which fingers crossed is going to get published. And there's some other interesting stuff we're doing regards to reactive strength index. But definitely pop Eamon Flanagan a message, because the guy... I know this is mainly about combat sports, but his stuff will definitely go over into that, and it's all about exercise economy.
Perfect, yeah, and shoot me those papers as well, because I'll do. I publish, and then for the previous ones, I'll do some YouTube videos on them, and I'll do some Instagram stuff on them, and spread it wide.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, James. It's been really good, actually. I was expecting to get pummeled, but this is quite good because I'm waiting to get this up and running. So I appreciate your time.
Ah, perfect. Cheers.